Hi and welcome to the DE Physical Education Flip Learning videos.
Energy transfer in the body. Understanding the energy continuum to explain which energy system is the main energy provider according to the intensity and duration of the training. Energy transfer in the body. We need a constant supply of energy so we can perform everyday tasks such as tissue repair and body growth. The more exercise we do, the more energy is required. When we exercise, the body converts energy from food into energy from muscle contractions in order to produce movements such as running, jumping, catching, and throwing. However, how is energy produced when we need it quickly? The intensity and duration of an activity play an important role in the way in which energy is provided. Key terms you should know before we start this section. Adenine triphosphate, or ATP. The only usable form of energy in the body. In the body, the energy we use for muscle contractions comes from adenine triphosphate, often referred to as ATP. It is the only usable form of chemical energy in the body. The energy derived from food that is used to form ATP. ATP consists of 1 adenines and 3 or triphosphates. ATP breakdown. Enzymes are used to break down components. Enzymes are used to break down compounds, and in this instance, ATPase is the enzyme used to break down ATP, leaving adenine diphosphate and inorganic phosphate. As we can see here, our ATP starts off like this, so adenine and then 3 phosphates, and energy is released when the compound is broken down. So by using the enzyme ATPase to break down the ATP, it starts to create energy. This energy is then the start of the process that is used by your body to make movement. Energy systems. The body has to constantly rebuild ATP by converting the adenine diphosphate and inorganic phosphate back into ATP. We can resynthesize, basically recreate, ATP from 3 different types of chemical reactions in the muscles. These chemical reactions are fueled by either food or a chemical called phosphocreatine, which is found in our muscles. The conversion of these fuels into energy takes place through one of 3 energy systems: the aerobic system, the ATP-PC system, or the anaerobic glycolic system. The 3 energy systems. So the aerobic system, this would be used for aerobic activities, and because it's aerobic, it's going to involve air. The ATP-PC system, this will be used for high intensity sprinting events or power events. It lasts roughly about 12 seconds. And then the anaerobic glycolic system. This is kind of filling the gaps in between, sometimes referred to as the lactic acid system. Each energy system is suited to a particular type of exercise depending on its intensity and duration and whether oxygen is present. The higher the intensity of the activity, the more the individual will rely on anaerobic energy production from either the ATP-PC or the anaerobic glycolic system. The lower the intensity and the longer the duration of the activity, the more the individual will use the aerobic system. The ATP-PC system. This is an energy system using phosphocreatine as its fuel. PC is an energy-rich phosphate compound found in the sarcoplasm of the muscles and can be broken down quickly and easily to release energy to resynthesize ATP. Its rapid availability is important for single maximal movements such as long jump or shot put. However, the disadvantage of this system is that the stores are limited. There is enough PC to last roughly 5 to 8 seconds, and it can be replenished during low intensity work when the oxygen is available. For example, Usain Bolt does not run the whole 100 metres with PC as his only energy system. He slows down in the last 20 metres and his stores of PC run out, and he has to use a slower method of producing energy. You'll have seen this if you ever watch a video of him. During the last sort of 20 minutes, you see him slowing down. This is because his body can no longer use PC and he has to use one of the other energy methods. The other two are slower, therefore his ability slows down. How the ATP-PC system provides energy. The ATP-PC system is an anaerobic process of resynthesizing ATP. When the enzyme creatine kinase detects high levels of ADP, it breaks down the phosphocreatine in the muscles to phosphate and creatine, releasing energy. So phosphate, that's in our muscles, breaks down into phosphate and creatine, and this is going to create energy. The energy is then used to convert ADP and ATP in a coupled reaction. So the energy converts the phosphate and the adenines into adenine triphosphate, or ATP. And this is the start again of that energy being released. The ATP system continued. For every molecule of PC broken down, there is enough energy released to create one molecule of ATP. This means the system is not very efficient, but it does have an advantage of not producing fatigue byproducts. And its use is important in the delay the onset of the anaerobic glycolic system. So basically, this system has to be used first because the anaerobic glycolic system can't start instantly, whereas the ATP-PC system can start instantly, up to about 5 to 8 seconds, sometimes up to about 10, but then the anaerobic glycolic system kicks in. However, because it runs out quicker, there is a need to work at a high level of intensity for longer. The body then finds another source of energy to resynthesize ATP. It can do this using carbohydrates in the anaerobic glycolic system. Advantages of the ATP-PC system. The ATP can be resynthesized rapidly using ATP-PC system. Phosphocreatine stores can be resynthesized quickly. Roughly, after about 30 seconds, 50% of the phosphocreatine stores have been replenished, and after about 3 minutes, 100% of it have been replenished. So after 3 minutes, again, you can have another sort of 4 to 8 second boost, and after 3 minutes, again, you have all of it back in, so that 5 to sort of 10, maybe even 12 seconds of the ATP-PC system. There's also no fatiguing byproducts. It is possible to extend the time the ATP-PC system can be utilised through the use of creatine supplements. Some of the disadvantages. There is only a limited supply of phosphocreatine in the muscle cells, and it can only last for roughly 10 seconds. Only one molecule of ATP can be resynthesized for every molecule of phosphocreatine. Phosphocreatine resynthesized can only take place in the presence of oxygen, when the intensity of the exercise is reduced. The lactic acid system. The ATP-PC system is an immediate aerobic system, but as already discussed, can only supply energy for a short amount of time. The short-term lactic anaerobic system, also called the anaerobic glycolic system, provides energy for high-intensity activity for longer than the ATP-PC system. It provides energy for high-intensity activity for longer than the ATP-PC system. However, how long the system lasts depends on the fitness of the individual and how high the exercise intensity is. Working flat out to exhaustion will mean the system will last a much shorter time, hence short term. This is because the demand for the energy is extremely high. For example, an elite athlete can run 400 meters in under 45 seconds. However, they will not be able to run immediately after at the same pace. However, if they reduce the intensity, that same athlete could run for 2 to 3 minutes of intensity because the demand is lower. The anaerobic glycolic system resynthesizes ATP from the breakdown of the fuel glucose. This is supplied from the digestion of carbohydrates and is stored in the muscles and liver as glycogen, where it is readily available. Key terms you should know. Short-term lactic anaerobic system. This produces high-powered energy for high-intensity efforts in events such as the 400 meters. How the lactic anaerobic system provides energy. When the PC stores are low, the enzyme glycogen phosphorylase is activated to break down the glycogen into glucose, which is then further broken down by pyruvic acid by the enzyme phosphofructinase. This process is called anaerobic glycolysis and takes place in the sarcoplasm of the muscles where oxygen is not available. Since this is an anaerobic process, the pyruvic acid is then broken down into lactic acid by the enzyme lactate dehydrogenase, or LDH. During anaerobic glycolysis, energy is released to allow ATP to resynthesize. The net result is 2 molecules of ATP are produced for 1 molecule of glucose broken down. There are actually 4 molecules produced, but 2 of them are used to provide the energy for the glycolysis itself. So, here we can see sort of a breakdown of the lactic anaerobic system in summary. The glycogen phosphase is sort of been broken down, comes from our muscles, our liver, or our glycogen. This is then turned into glucose, and this glycolysis process takes place. So our phosphofructinase breaks down the pyruvic acid. It creates 2 ATP that we can then use for energy to do activities, but at the same time it's also going to create lactic acid. Right? So it creates 2 energies we can use. It creates 2 further ones to power this process, but it's also creating lactic acid as the byproduct. And this all takes place in the sarcoplasm. Advantages and disadvantages of the anaerobic glycolic system. ATP can be resynthesized quite quickly due to very few chemical reactions, and it lasts for longer than the ATP-PC system. In the presence of oxygen, lactic acid can be converted back into liver glycogen or used as fuel through oxidation into carbon dioxide and water. It can be used for a sprint finish, i.e. to produce an extra burst of energy. Disadvantages is that lactic acid is the byproduct. The accumulation of acid in the body deneutralizes enzymes and prevents them from increasing the rate at which chemical reaction takes place. Or in layman's terms, the buildup of lactic acid reduces the efficiency of the system, therefore less energy can be produced. Only a small amount of energy can be released from the glycogen under anaerobic conditions. Only 2 ATP is being created. If we think about our ATP-PC system that only lasts a few seconds, that is only making 1. This system is only making 2 ATPs that can be used for energy. Whereas if it was under aerobic conditions, where oxygen is involved and it can resynthesize, it goes from about 5% to almost 95%. Key terms you should know. The key points about glycolysis are the breakdown of glucose to pyruvic acid. It produces 2 molecules of ATP, and during intense exercise, pyruvic acid is converted into lactic acid. The aerobic system. The aerobic system. When exercise intensity is low and oxygen supply is high, e.g. jogging, the aerobic system is the preferred energy pathway. The system breaks down glucose into carbon dioxide and water, which in the presence of oxygen is much more efficient. The complete oxidation of glucose can produce up to 38 molecules of ATP. If you remember, the other 2 create 1 or 2, so this one creates 38 molecules of ATP. Fats in the form of fatty acids and protein in the form of amino acids can also be broken down. The products of fat and protein metabolism are reduced to the molecule acetylcontinuase that enters the Krebs cycle, stage 2 of the aerobic system. Key terms you should know. Glycolysis, a process in which glucose is converted into pyruvate to produce energy. Sarcoplasm, the fluid that surrounds the nucleus of a muscle fibre and is a site where anaerobic respiration takes place. And the Krebs cycle, a series of clinical chemical reactions that take place using oxygen in the matrix of the mitochondria. How the aerobic system works. It has 3 stages. Glycolysis, the first stage, is an anaerobic, so it takes place in the sarcoplasm of the muscles. Glycolysis is the breakdown of glucose to pyruvic acid. For every molecule of glucose undergoing glycolysis, a net of 2 molecules of ATP is formed. Before the pyruvic acid produces in glycolysis can enter the next stage, it is oxidized into 2 atrial groups, and this then is carried into the Krebs cycle by the coenzyme A. Krebs cycle, the 2 atrial groups diffuse in the matrix of the mitochondria, and a complex cycle of reactions occurs in this process known as the Krebs cycle. Here the atrial group combine with oxalic acid forming citric acid. Hydrogen is removed from the citric acid and rearranged to form citric acid undergoes oxidative carboxylation, which simply means the carbon and the hydrogen are given off. The carbon forms carbon dioxide, which is then transported to the lungs and is breathed out, and hydrogen is taken to the electric transport chain. The reactions that occur result in the production of 2 molecules of ATP. As we can see here, this is a diagram of what is happening on the left. So it's going to break down and it's going to create carbon dioxide, the hydrogen is going to be removed, and it's going to create 2 ATP of citric acid. The electron transport chain. Hydrogen is carried to the electric transport chain by hydrogen carriers. This occurs in the crickets of the mitochondria, and the hydrogen splits into hydrogen ions and electrons, and these are charged with potential energy. The hydrogen ions are oxidized to form water, while the hydrogen electrons provide the energy to resynthesize ATP. Throughout this process, 34 ATP are formed. It's important to remember that so far we've only discussed glucose with regards to the aerobic system, but fats in the form of fatty acids and proteins in the form of amino acids are 2 other energy sources that can be broken down under aerobic conditions to provide energy for us to exercise. These can either enter the Krebs cycle or eventually the electron transport chain to produce ATP. Key terms you should know. The electron transport chain involved a series of chemical reactions in the crickets of the mitochondria where hydrogen is oxidized to water and 34 ATP are produced. Beta oxidation. Stored fat is broken down into glycerol and free fatty acids for transportation by the blood. These fatty acids then undergo a process called beta oxidation, where they are converted into acyl coenzyme A, which is the entry molecule for the Krebs cycle. From this point on, fat metabolism follows the same pathway as the glycogen metabolism. So ultimately, it creates energy the same way, it just changes the energy source it is using from glycogen or glucose into fat or amino acids. More ATP can be made from 1 molecule of fatty acids than 1 molecule of glucose, which is why in the long duration, low intensity exercise, fatty acids will be the predominant energy source, but this does depend on the fitness of the performer. Advantages and disadvantages of the aerobic system. More ATP can be produced, roughly about 36. There are no fatiguing byproducts. Lots of glycogen and triglyceride stores, so exercise can last for a long time. And disadvantages, this is a complicated system that This is a complicated system that cannot be used straight away. It takes a while for It takes a while for enough oxygen. It takes a while for enough oxygen to become available to meet the demands of the activity and ensure glycogen and fatty acids are completely broken down. Fatty acid transportation to the muscles is low and also requires 15% more oxygen to be broken down than glycogen. Here is a summary of the aerobic system. So it starts off with glycogen, and again, the same process could happen with fats, and it would be using amino acids, but for this one we're going to use glycogen. Glycogen then goes through a process called glycolysis, which turns it into glucose. At this stage, it's created 2 ATP that can be used for energy. Pyruvic acid is then added. If there's no oxygen, it creates lactic acid, and obviously this reduces the efficiency of the system. However, in the presence of oxygen, the following then happens within the mitochondria. The activated coenzyme A is the enzyme that has been using to break this down, and it creates the following system. Right? So at this stage, it creates 2 more ATP, and it also creates carbon dioxide, which will be removed through gaseous exchange. Right? Another part of it that is created is hydrogen. So this hydrogen is then used as part of the electron transport chain and is carried by the hydrogen carriers. Oxygen is then added because this is under the presence of oxygen. At this stage, it creates 34 ATP, and the byproduct is water, which again is removed through the gaseous exchange. This then continues to our electric transport chain. Key terms you should know: phosphocreatine, an energy-rich phosphate compound found in the sarcoplasm of the muscles. The energy continuum. The energy continuum, in layman's terms, is basically which energy source your body selects as it's doing exercise. The graph on the right demonstrates the overlap between each energy system. Pause the video and have a think why you believe that these would overlap. The recovery process. The ATP-PC system and the lactic acid system enable the body to use available energy in the muscles quickly without the use of oxygen. The muscles therefore borrow energy and repay it later, with the excess energy being created by the aerobic system. This is often referred to as excess post-exercise oxygen consumption, or oxygen debt. So we look here at the start of our exercise. It's going to use the ATP-PC system. Obviously you're going to get that first sort of 5 to 8, maybe even 12 seconds of energy. Then it's going to move across to our lactic acid system. And as the exercise continues, it's going to move to our aerobic energy system, right, when oxygen is involved. However, for this first bit here, oxygen has not been used in the breakdown or the process of creating that energy. So this oxygen that's been used needs to be repaid. That means that when we finish our exercise, this is where the excess post-exercise oxygen consumption takes place. You'll have noticed this, that if you ever finished a sprint, you often have big, deep breaths. That's what will be happening here. There's also this concept of a fast component. This deals with the resynthesis of phosphocreatine. To achieve this resynthesis, the aerobic system provides energy to reserve the original exothermic reaction. So creatine plus phosphogen plus energy from the aerobic system creates PC. The slow component, this works specifically to remove the lactic acid from the body. Therefore, lactic acid is converted back to pyruvic acid, which in turn is converted to glucose and glycogen in the reversal of glycolysis. Through the Cori cycle, where lactic acid is removed to the liver, lactic acid is converted back to glycogen and returned to the muscles. Benefits of a cool down. This can substantially reduce the time taken to remove the lactic acid. The amount of time taken to recover depends on the intensity and type of exercise undertaken, and interval cooldowns have been proven to be more efficient in reducing lactic acid because they're keeping your systems working and removing this lactic acid, whereas if you just stopped, the lactic acid would then build up.